This is Ilara Virely. She thought love meant sacrifice. For 3 years, she gave everything to her cold, distant husband, Corin Valero, the billionaire heir who never promised her affection, only a place by his side. But on the day she buried her mother, she found him in the arms of another woman. That was the moment everything changed. Listen as Ilara navigates her journey with a distant, cold-hearted husband. Get ready for one of the most powerful stories you've ever heard. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. Corin, I want a divorce. Ilara Virely spoke, finding her voice a minute after seeing her husband, Corin Valero, and his self-acclaimed best friend, Myra Solon, in an intimate position on the black, long, plushy L-shaped, gold-trimmed sofa in the sitting room. What good husband would abandon his wife to grief today? What good husband would choose his work, or rather mistress now, overspending at least 5 minutes to mourn with his wife over her mother's death? What good husband was that cold-hearted? Seeing them had brought to her remembrance the unflattering, yet heartbreaking picture that Myra had sent to her 2 days ago, of Corin sleeping at Myra's home in her bed, intertwined with her. Ilara had been beyond pain then, but now she just let out a sarcastic laugh. She could not longer take it again. Divorce. Ilara had always thought it an abstract event, relegated to certain people but not her. Yet at this moment, this was the only thing she wanted to do. Oh, the tides of life. She watched now as Myra dealt her a withering glare, before slithering out of the arms of Corin, who had turned lazily to see the disruptor of his peace. "What did you just say, Ilara?" Corin asked, sitting up properly on the sofa, his countenance a canvas of aloofness. A bystander would think that he was asking about the weather or inquiring about the time. "I've had enough, Corin. Grant a divorce." Ilara answered, clamping down the hurt and searing pain that was threatening to mask her face on seeing Myra slip her right hand into Corin's open palm. Was that a solidarity stance? Ilara wasn't sure, but it pained her the most. Her heart tethered on breakage the most when Corin clasped and covered Myra's hand with an attitude that suggested normalcy. Ilara felt faint then, yet she stood her ground, choosing to see the end of this matter there and then, before disappearing to grieve two losses. She believed that she had no choice at the moment. Seeing that Corin didn't care for her emotions, had never cared actually, it would be stupid of her to break down in tears before them. Her foolishness and naivety of 3 years ended here. She no longer had the desire to thaw the ice that was Corin Valero. "I told you from the very beginning," Corin started, rubbing gentle, slow circles on Myra's palm. An act which Ilara swallowed bravely amidst the withering ache that assailed her heart, without blinking an eyelid. "There would be no easy way out of this marriage. Not until I get what I want from you, and that day looks to be a long way off. Unfortunately, cliché though it may seem, you've made this bed and we both have to lay in it. I can't live like this anymore, Corin. Yes, stupid made the bed, but I think we should get rid of the bed at this point. There is no use lying on it again." Ilara attempted the dark humor with a chuckle, resting nonchalantly by a wall, choosing to take up the aloof countenance that her husband was sporting. She knew she couldn't cower at this point. On her lips was a chilly smile that grated on Myra's nerves, and in her eyes was a mixture of stark hatred and anger which unsettled Corin deeply. Corin stood then, so instant and aggressive, the first crack in his aloof countenance, that Ilara's right hand unconsciously flew over her stomach. This action didn't go unnoticed by Myra, whose mind wheels were already in motion. "Do you think I'm happy being with you?" Corin asked, unable to mask the tremor in his voice, still raking in a shallow unbelief that Ilara would want to dispose of him nonchalantly. Had her love been fake all this while? Well, wasn't she her father's daughter? "I need a divorce too, wife. But first, you need to bring forth a son for your father so that he can return my property to me." He covered the distance between them as he dropped the bombshell. Ilara furrowed her eyebrows, not understanding what property Corin was talking about. "What are you talking about, Corin?" The illiterate breeder feigns ignorance. Ilara bristled at Myra's snide comment, but she didn't grab the bait. Ignoring the jab at her education status, another cruelty of life to her, she concentrated on the other two actors. Breeder, property. What were the two idiots talking about? She had thought that Corin's obsession with a son had been because of the maintenance of a noble lineage, and to cement the union of the two companies that had been at loggerheads with each other since forever. However, she was beginning to think that there was more to the story, more that her father had kept hidden from her. This knowledge pushed her to tighten her hand over her stomach, as if to protect the child that she recently found had taken solace in her womb. Ilara had gotten the great news 2 days ago, but had decided to keep it under wraps. She had thought she could thaw Corin's cold heart with the news, but with these new revelations, she knew that was an impossible matter. She didn't know of her father's role in her marriage, only that he had persuaded her, his only child, to marry Corin, but she wouldn't leave her child in the hands of two cold men. "You want to be gone?" she heard Corin ask, his voice retrieving its cold and aloof quality. She nodded her head slowly, holding his gaze, unruffled when his blue eyes got darker with rage at her answer. "Then give a son. Until then, take that thought of divorce off your head. Hopefully, your barren womb will take pity on us and conceive after this night." "No way, I will never ever." But before Ilara could finish her statement, Corin, with an insane speed and agility, to the surprise of both, slick with sweat and limp with ecstasy, Ilara virally collapsed back into the bed, her mind befogged by the mind-blowing sex with Corin Villaro. Her slender form was still severely racked by the spasms of her strong release, and her earlier smoldering rage had subsided significantly. Ilara knew if she prolonged campaigning for her separation from Corin that she might never really leave him. Yes, the sex was that good. It was one thing she wouldn't fault Corin for. He was good in bed, so good that it numbed her of her thoughts most times, probably why she had remained in this marriage this long. But no more. Within seconds of their shared orgasm, Corin had untangled, disengaged, and distanced himself from her, lying on his back next to her with labored, ragged breathing. Even after all this time, his words, which were usually wrenched from him at his climax, remained suspended in the air between them and continued to cause more pain than was necessary. "Give a son, Ilara." With those 5 words, he inevitably killed the afterglow, destroyed the intimacy of the moment, and relegated the act into nothing more than a biological imperative. After 3 years of the same, Ilara had finally realized that it would never change. It had taken the events of today to tell her that. That's why she held strong to her own 5 words. They were words that had been on the tip of her tongue since he had met her in the bedroom after sending Myra Solon away 2 hours ago. Words that had coated her mouth when he had plunged into her. Words that she could no longer swallow back, no matter how much it killed her to say them. She sat up naked, her body still trembling, and drew her knees to her chest. She wrapped her arms around her legs, pressed her cheek to her knees, and watched as his breathing steadied. His own shaking was subsiding slightly. Corin lay spread-eagled, also magnificently nude. His eyes were shut, but she knew he wasn't asleep. No, he would take a few moments to compose himself before heading for the shower, where she always imagined him frantically scrubbing her scent and touch from his bronzed skin. She could no longer contain the words, and they spilled from her lips with desperate earnestness. "I still want a divorce, Corin. I won't demand for anything else. Please just let go. Please let me and your child go." Corin tensed. Every single muscle in his body went as tight as a coiled spring before he turned his head to meet her watchful gaze. His eyes were hooded and his upper lip curled mockingly. "But I thought you loved me, Ilara. You reveled in that in the early months of our marriage." He taunted with exquisite cruelty, and Alara lowered her eyelids, trying to mask the shaft of pain in his words. When she was sure she had her emotions under control, she once again lifted her eyes to his dark gaze. "Not anymore," she managed, hoping the lie sounded convincing. "Things change." "What things?" Corin rolled onto his side and propped himself up onto his elbow, resting his head on his hand. "Feelings, and I've changed," Alara answered softly. Corin chuckled, a snide chuckle which caused her to flinch more than words would. And just when she thought he wouldn't answer her again, she heard him speak coldly. "Maybe for you, I actually don't care," Corin shrugged. "But like I told you earlier today, no son, no divorce. That isn't hard now to grasp, is it? Myra would be happy to carry your son. Why don't you get married to her? You seem to love her," Alara asked, burying her face in her knees, fighting to keep the tears at bay. "I wish, but it isn't Myra that holds the treasure," Corin answered. "This is the last time we will discuss this," he added before getting up and walking naked to the en-suite bathroom, where she believed he dutifully scrubbed her scent off his body. Alara heard the shower start moments later and took a few seconds to compose herself, swiping the hot tears from her face with the backs of both hands before dragging on a gauzy peignoir and heading toward the kitchen to make herself a hot drink. While she was sitting on a bar stool, sipping her hot chocolate 15 minutes later, she felt Corin's presence behind her and the hairs in the nape of her neck stood on end. His aura was colder than usual. What happened now? "What is the meaning of this, Alara? Who is this man?" he asked with a voice of steel, gently dropping a phone in front of her before fisting his hands by his side. Alara furrowed her eyebrows as she stared into his phone. Her eyes widened in unbelief when she saw herself, no, definitely not her, in the arms of a naked man on a bed. It looked so intimate, so real that she almost baffled. Her eyes then strayed to the sender of the message. It was Myra, she scoffed. "That's not me, it's edited. Nice work though by Myra, the best friend," she commented flippantly, about to take up the cup for a sip of hot chocolate, when Corin gently stopped her midway by placing his hand on the cup, or rather on her hand on the cup. Alara jerked involuntarily, her hand leaving the cup, as if his touch had burned her, causing the cup to fall to the ground and break in pieces. Corin never touched her, unless they were in bed. Her eyes traveled to Corin, when he took the next stool to hers, confused when she saw the whirl of emotions there. There was anger, there was confusion, and there was. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to admit it, but there was hurt too, and jealousy, if she wanted to humor herself. But why would he feel that way? Corin hated her. He reminded her of that on a daily basis, either by his sparse words or his cold actions. "You can talk to me, Alara. For one, I know this wasn't edited. So tell me, Alara, who is this man?" "That is not me, Corin. I have never cheated on you before. You should ask your best friend where she bought the image from rather," she stated, her hand flying to her stomach, when Corin pounded his right fist on the table angrily. She had never seen him like this, had never seen him crack like this. Seeing her with another man must have upset him greatly. If she had known about this secret earlier, she might have gone out often with her best friend, Lyra Kayleys. "Do you take me as a fool, Alara? Myra can never lie to me. Why would she? I gave you a chance to redeem yourself, either by a truth or a denial, yet you choose to deny the picture completely. You think it a joke to taint my reputation. Do you know this is all over the socials?" Corin shouted at Alara in rage, losing control of himself for the first time, not understanding why she would cheat on him, not understanding the exact reason why he was shouting. Didn't she love him? He queried himself for the second time today. What has changed? Alara stood up then, drawing strength from the baby in her womb, not believing that he would believe such farce, yet knowing that he would always choose Myra over her at every turn. "Corin, that is not me. I think I have seen enough of your body, Alara, to know if you are the one. Put on a dress, wife. We are going." Ilara virally maintained a stoic face as she was pushed to the center of the hall, where a council of elders presided over issues emanating from the elites in the region. Not even her father's look of disappointment and disgust was able to excite an emotion out of her. He hadn't believed her words the previous night, when Corin Velaro had taken her to her home. Rather, he had kept cursing her for being as useless as her mother. Her father never forgave his wife for not giving him a son before her death. The only person that had believed her was Lyra Kayleys. No one else from the elite community or the public. If her mother had been alive then. Ilara Virely, you know why you are here, right? Ilara's attention returned to the matter on ground when she heard Myra Solin's father speak. He was one of the elders in the ruling council, and of course, he hated her. She shook her head mechanically to his question, eliciting murmurs from the crowd that had added up from the two families involved in the case. They couldn't believe her audacity. Ilara, we are not here to play around. How can you not know why you are here? You have been accused of cheating on Mr. Corin of the Velaro clan. What do you have to say on the matter? Another elder asked, taking the reins of the interrogation. I didn't cheat on Corin. If there was a cheat in our marriage, then it should be him. Weren't you all aware of his improper relationship with his best friend, Myra, frolicking with a mistress under the guise of friendship? Ilara chuckled about the smartness of the arrangement before speaking again. Did y'all say anything? Was Corin sanctioned for disregarding the sacred union? She questioned calmly, struggling to put her rageful emotions on hold. Bursting out in anger wouldn't help her in the council. Myra's father scoffed. What insolence! Do you have proof? Has your unfounded jealousy driven you to cheat on him with another man? Don't change us from the discourse, young lady. Tell us why you committed this disgraceful act on the eve of your mother's funeral. Isn't that cruel? Ilara inhaled deeply, feeling the jab sink straight into her heart and increase the pain that was already there 100-fold. They would include her mother into this too. At this point, she hated herself for ever choosing Corin. If only she could turn back the hands of time. I didn't sleep with another man. That picture was edited, or the woman isn't me, she managed to answer, her hands remaining as fists by her side. There was an outbreak of laughter in the crowd. Do you think us stupid, Ilara? That picture isn't edited. You have been caught in the act. Be truthful and we can perhaps reduce your sentence, Myra's father requested. Ilara smiled then, annoying the hell out of Corin, who was still seething in anger over being betrayed by an illiterate woman. Corin couldn't believe that Ilara had the audacity to smile while on trial. She should be ashamed, begging for mercy, and not smiling. You want to lie, Elder Malric. I'm sorry, but I can't. That is not me. Elder Malric smirked at Ilara's response. Okay then. What were you doing at Hotel Highway 2 days ago, before your mother's burial? He asked, standing up and sharing a bunch of papers with the other elders on the governing council. The paper depicted the records of a room that had been booked by Ilara. You were meeting a man, weren't you? The CCTV had captured that. Ilara smiled again, grating on the nerves of the people. She already knew where they were heading with this. It's a good thing, then, that Riven Dax was here. He would come to her rescue. Yes, I was there to meet an old friend for a meal. Corin folded his fists for the umpteenth time. He couldn't believe the nerve of this woman. Beside him was Myra, with a false look of pity on her face. Riven had just returned from a trip and had called upon me for a talk. I met him at the hotel. We had lunch at the hotel's eatery. Whilst there, I got sick, and he told me to move to the room which I had booked for him in advance and take a rest on the bed while he called for the doctor. I obeyed, but I dozed off minutes later while waiting. Ilara paused when the murmurings got louder. It was so sinister and loud that Elder Thaler had to strike the table to ensure silence. He gestured at her to continue when there was silence. When I woke up from the nap, I saw a bunch of medicines on the table. It seemed that the doctor had come and left. I took the medicines before leaving the room. I didn't see Riven, so I left him a message. Nothing happened, Elder Thaler. Riven is here. You can ask him. Alara finished with a definite calm, not finding it necessary to add that the stay was when she had found out about her pregnancy. Yet her calm was broken by chills transcending the contours of her body when she saw a smirk on Elder Malric's lips, right before he called on Riven from the crowd. What was that smirk about? She wondered, dread settling in the pit of her stomach when Riven stepped onto the podium right opposite her, and yet couldn't meet her eyes. She swallowed nothing, feeling her hands begin to sweat. Evil foreboding overwhelmed her so much that she felt faint. Riven was her only source of salvation, but why was he looking like her sentenced to death? Riven, you pledge to speak only the truth, the head of the ruling council asked, and Riven nodded slowly. Then I am sure that you know why you are here. The accused had called you as a witness. What really happened at the hotel? Alara watched forlornly as Riven's eyes darted between Myra and her father. Without him speaking, she already knew that she was condemned. She couldn't believe that her childhood friend, a best friend to her and Lyra, could do this to her. How could he? What had they promised him? She wondered, her ears attuned to the lies he was spouting already. Yes, I met Alara in the hotel to talk and catch up. There she had told me of her mother's death and had bemoaned the bad state of her mind. Then she pleaded with me to make her forget that she had always wondered what it would be like to sleep with me, that she had always wanted me in her bed, Riven began, his face shrouded in false pity and remorse. Alara couldn't help at this moment but to gape openly at Riven. What he was saying was utterly ridiculous. He's lying. I never did this, she cried out, her resolve to remain calm despite the odds breaking finally. But her passionate statement resulted in everybody looking at her like she was crazy. No one would believe her. All of them were expecting her to go to hell. Alara gasped softly at this knowledge, unable this time around to stop the tear that slipped past her eyes. Quickly, though, she wiped it off and recapped her staidness. I had no choice but to do that. She had promised secrecy and a position in her husband's company. I couldn't resist such an offer, so I succumbed. I don't know how the pictures were made public, though, Riven concluded, his face a template of false remorse. There were many loopholes to the story, like who had taken the pictures and the time frame, but Alara made no sound. She had seen the resigned look on Corin's face already. He believed Riven. Well, I think we have our truth now. Anything you would like to say, Alara, in your defense? Elder Malric asked mockingly, but Alara shook her head. There was nothing to say. Corin, over to you. What do you want for her? The ruling elder asked, clasping his hands together. Obviously, the case was over. Corin stood up from his seat sharply, and keeping a tight lid over his emotions. He spoke with a straight face and a cold voice. I, Corin Valero, head of the Valero family, reject you, Alara Virely, as my wife and co-leader of my clan and town. You can collect the divorce papers on your way out. Without stopping, without caring to know how Alara had taken the rejection, he continued, this time to the elders. And I want her banished from my city and my father's land returned. Once done, Corin turned around and walked out of the meeting, his eyes not catching when Alara fell to the, Didn't you hear me? Get out of here, slut. Alara Virely remained stiff as her father slapped her for the third time and ordered her out of the family compound. Father, I just want my belongings in. But Jerk Voss wasn't one to listen when angry. Shut up, you ungrateful child. I don't want to hear any nonsense from you. The one thing you could have done for me out of your miserable existence, you failed at it. You couldn't give a son and you couldn't keep your marriage. Rather, you soiled my reputation and destroyed my chance of profiting off that proud boy. I shouldn't have let your mother bring you in when she found you at the barn. Cursed be the person that had dropped you by our doorstep, and cursed be you. Alara stirred then, having heard that she wasn't her father's daughter. "What are you talking about, father? What do you mean?" But Jerk wasn't having any of it. He called for his assistant's son. "Take this slut out of here. I don't want to ever see her in this compound. She is forever banished from this family, from my town, and from this city." Ilara cried out loudly in pain as she felt the breaking of the familial bonds for the second time. When Corin Velaro had issued his rejection, the same thing had happened. Pain, loneliness, rejection. She would have felt useless, would have given in to despair, but for the baby residing in her womb. She had to be strong. Not wanting the hands of Dorian Kess, the deputy's son, on her, she turned around before she could be touched and left the compound, walking the short distance to Lyra Cayley's house. There was a high probability that she wouldn't be accepted past the door by Lyra's parents, but she had to take the risk. She needed her friend's help. Luckily for Ilara, Lyra was the one that opened the door when she knocked. She heaved in relief when her best friend engulfed her in a bear hug, before demanding that she step inside the sitting room. "I can't, Lyra. My father just banished me. It would spell trouble for you and your family if I'm seen here. You know how it works in this town. I just need you to help with cash and a few clothes. I promise I will pay you back." Ilara pleaded with her friend, who sighed in annoyance at the precarious situation. "This is unfair," Lyra muttered, as she gestured with her hand that Ilara should wait, whilst she strolled into the house without shutting the front door. Ilara smiled wistfully at this. She knew that her friend left the door open as a challenge to any onlooker. She knew that Lyra wanted her to come inside still and take a seat. But Ilara wasn't selfish, so she stayed outside on the porch until Lyra returned 10 minutes later. "You really stood outside. That's all right. Didn't expect anything less from you. Here." Lyra dropped a big backpack on the ground. "It contains some clothes and the necessary accessories very important to our gender. There is also some cash. I stowed it away at that particular bottom pocket known to only you and I. It should be enough to get you by. And lastly, take this." She handed a piece of paper to an already emotional Ilara. "It's an address. When you get there, ask for Cash and Vale. He is a friend of mine. Just tell him that I sent you. He would know what to do. He is a good person." Ilara muttered a heartfelt "thank you" before engulfing her friend in a hug that lasted until Lady Viral came into the sitting room. "What is happening here? Lyra, didn't you hear Jerk's decree?" Ilara muttered a greeting to Lady Viral, and without much ado, picked up the backpack and said goodbye to her best friend before hurriedly turning away and descending down the short steps, not wanting to bring trouble to her friend. When she got to the borders of the town, she saw Myra Solon in talks with the security personnel of Corin's town. Their borders were just opposite each other, separated by a grassy chasm, a lengthy path that served as a common route outside the region's confines. "Oh, what do we have here?" Myra screamed in sheer delight and derision when she saw Ilara. She had just been instructing the security personnel stationed for today's patrol to not let Ilara into the town, no matter what. She had believed that Ilara might strut in to plead with Corin for a second chance or help. Whatever it was, Myra didn't want the duo to cross paths again. She had gone to terrifying lengths to separate the two. She couldn't bear to have her efforts nullified at this time. It was great that Corin had banished Ilara from the entire city too, the power her man held. Ilara, pretending that she wasn't hearing any of Myra's gibberish, tightened her grasp on the backpack and started threading the grassy path that would lead her out of the region. But Myra wasn't one to be ignored. "How dare you ignore me?" she asked, dragging Ilara by the arm. "Who do you think you are, walking out on me? Do you forget that you are alone now, that you are useless? Worse, you have no education, so I wonder how you will survive without your father's aid. I heard he disowned you." A snide chuckle followed the statement. Ilara gritted her teeth in anger before violently shaking herself away from Myra's grip. "You got what you wanted, Myra, so let me be. I know that you and your father had been behind the setup with Riven. I suggest you mind your business at this point, or else I might scatter your fairytale reality with just one word to Corin." Myra indulged in a disjointed laughter to mask the antsy feeling that was crawling over her body at Alara's words. A word to Corin that would puncture her joyful moment. What could that be? Was the illiterate bitch serious, or was she just making a fake attempt at being brave? Alara scoffed, seeing the near speechlessness of Myra. Of course, she would never tell Corin that she was pregnant at this point. He wouldn't believe her. But it was nice unsettling Myra. The latter always thought she had things in control, the reason for the ever-present proud look on her face. "You should be out of here, bitch, before Corin takes notice of your presence. He is disgusted by your very existence," Myra stated, folding her arms across her chest as she faked pity, whilst rejoicing inside at seeing her rival in pain. Alara chuckled, hearing these words from Myra. "Saving face now, are we?" She laughed more wildly when she saw the comical expressions on the faces of Myra and the two security personnel behind her. They must think her crazy, but she didn't care. She was stirred now, and while at it, she would love to hear the truth from Myra. She would love to know how they had gotten her childhood friend to their side. He wasn't even from their town. How could he betray her? "You were behind it, right? You were behind the setup. You and your father," she inquired calmly, dying the laughter, keeping a firm hold on the backpack and on her feelings. Myra scoffed at the question before asking the guards to leave. When she was sure they were far gone, she turned around and looked at Alara with contempt. "Yes, I did it, and so what?" Alara nodded, not in the least surprised about the answer. "Riven, how did you get him to your side? Was his meeting a planned operation? Was that where the setup had begun?" "Riven was easy to win over," Myra lied, perturbed when her words had no desired effect on Alara. It was like the latter had taken Corin's cold demeanor with her. Has she always been like this? Why wasn't she rising to the bait? Or was this how her surrender looked like? Was she tired of fighting? That must be it, Myra thought with a nod, about opening her mouth to spurt more lies, when a deep voice sauntered into the conversation going on between the women. "What's going on here?" Myra jumped frightfully as she heard the voice behind her. Myra Solon shriveled when Fenric Lorne came to stand before her, his eyes glazing with a sheer indifference to her, as always. For the first time, she was glad about it. It showed that he hadn't heard her discussion with Alara Virely. Fenric was Corin Velaro's right-hand man and his best friend. A no-nonsense man who wasn't fooled by Myra's antics. He knew of her obsession with Corin, but had maintained his peace for the unity of his friend's union. Myra wondered what he would do now. She knew that he had always favored Alara over her, even though the latter wasn't aware of it. "Mies, Alara, what are you doing here?" Fenric questioned, darting glances between the two women. He bit his lower lip for almost calling Alara mistress, his eyebrows furrowing when he saw the knapsack in her hand. "Where are you going?" "She is going." "Myra, I don't remember asking you any question. You can leave now. I think your father is searching for you," Fenric mentioned, not bothering to even bestow a glance at the offending female. For reasons best known to him, he had never accepted Myra into his life as a friend or anything else, no matter how much she had thrown herself in his way, a fact that Corin was unaware of. Fenric was beginning to wonder if he had made the right choice by keeping it away from Corin. Perhaps if he had told his friend, the latter would have been skeptical in believing whatever Myra told him. He would have probably investigated the cheating event before denouncing Alara as his wife. Fenric was logical, especially as he wasn't involved in the scandal. There were a lot of loopholes in Riven Dax's account, yet nobody had mentioned that. He knew that if the matter was thoroughly investigated, Alara would be innocent. Alara wasn't one to cheat. She was illiterate, yes, but she wasn't disloyal. He knew that much, having known her these past 3 years. Too bad that Corin had been too caught up in his emotions, that he had acted unlike himself. Or had the latter seen this as an escape route out of the loveless marriage and a way to get back his father's land? Fenric shook his head. His friend wasn't that underhanded. No matter what, Corin always chose the truth over anything else, including his emotions. This made Fenric wonder why Corin had let his feelings cloud his judgment. Could it be? If you say so, then I am out of here. Enjoy your journey, Alara. Hopefully, the highway criminals won't tear you apart before you get to another city, Myra commented, breaking Fenric's thoughts just before she turned away and began to head into the town. Fenric scoffed just as he glanced at Alara, who found the wish evil. Criminals? She hadn't thought of that. Don't mind Myra. The criminals have been pursued far north. Just keep to the path and out of the thick bushes and you will be fine. I promise. Alara nodded in appreciation. Fenric was just as cold as Corin, but she knew that he didn't hate her. Thank you, Fenric. And for your question, I'm not sure where I am heading to. Time will tell, I guess. Fenric peaked his eyebrows, still not understanding why she was leaving her father's town. He banished me, Alara said after a beat, reading off the question on the male's face. My father banished me. Corin Velaro dropped the pen he was using to sign the ledger, out of frustration, when Fenric sighed for the third time in a row. His best friend had arrived in his office a couple of minutes ago in a sour mood. He had resisted asking him what the problem was because he had been busy. It seemed that he couldn't help but get involved now. What is it, Fenric? He asked, pushing the ledger in front of him to the right side of the large brown mahogany desk, his hands clasping and resting on the now empty space on the desk. It's about Alara and the incident that transpired yesterday, Fenric started, his morale not in the least dampened when Corin scowled at him. I don't want to hear her name, Fenric. And why the sudden interest in my ex-wife? Did she manage to sink her sly claws in you before leaving for her father's town? Corin inquired, getting out of his seat, becoming restless all of a sudden. It had been like this since he had found the shamming photo. He didn't understand why it was so, but he believed that time would cure it. However, why was his best friend interested in that sly woman now? Had she told him something? Since he married Alara, Fenric had only been civil to her, and that was because of the position she held in the town. Yet here was his friend, talking about her as if he wanted to defend her. Corin could see the look in Fenric's eyes, and he knew that his friend wouldn't stop until he had said what was in his mind. Corin, I think she is innocent, Fenric started, standing up to his feet, abandoning the comfort of the soft sofa when Corin glared at him. I know, but just let me speak. You have 5 minutes to state your case, Corin obliged, curious to hear what his friend would say in defense of his ex-wife who had thrown mud on his face. To think that he had resolved to be a bit lenient to her, at the request of her mother, before the lovely woman had passed away. Fenric paced around a few paces, collecting his thoughts before speaking again. I think it was a setup by Elder Malric and Myra to separate the both of you, so that Myra can be your wife. Fenric shook his head when Corin waved him away, a sign to stop talking and get out of the office. I am not done yet, Corin. I know that Myra is your childhood friend, and that she had saved you from drowning those years ago, although there is no evidence that she was actually the one. Okay, that's it. Get out, Fenric. I don't know what Alara told you, but that woman is as sly as her father. I don't trust her, and you shouldn't either. Secondly, I wouldn't have you tarnish Myra's image. That lady has been of immense help to me. If she hadn't saved me those years ago from... Yeah, I've heard that so many times. She is your assumed savior. I get it. She is not assumed, she is. Get out, Fenric. I don't think you are in your right senses, Corin stated coldly, angry at his best friend, angrier at Alara for trying to sow discord between his friend and him. What was her plan? Maybe he should pay her a visit and give her a piece of his mind. A last warning per se to stay out of his business. Corin, Fenric tried again, but Corin wasn't having it. Out, Fenric. You can come back in when your senses have returned. Fenric huffed and took a few steps in the direction of the door. He stopped, however, to the amazement of Corin, who was beginning to find the scene amusing, yet annoying. Well, since you are hell-bent on believing Myra to the end, you should know that Alara's father disowned her and banished her from the town. And on my way here, I saw your Myra in a heated discussion with Riven and her father. They seemed to be arguing so intensely that they hadn't been aware of my presence until later. Fenric turned when his words were greeted with silence. Seeing that Corin was still standing, processing the information, gave him the incentive to say the rest of his thoughts. I didn't hear much, but one thing was clear. Riven had been asking for money, amnesty, and something about freeing his brother. I don't know who. If that doesn't tell you that his account was false and that he has been working for Myra and her father to oust Alara, I don't know what will. A slight pause. It seems that Alara's father had also banished him. To add to these, I hadn't told you before, but Myra isn't as pure as you think she is. She has tried seducing me. Times without a number. I know it is incredulous. I know that you are happy to be in possession of your father's land now, but I think that you should investigate this scandal. And then what? Corin asked, folding his arms across his chest. He peaked his eyebrows when Fenric's mouth fell open. Just leave, Fenric. The deed has already been done. But I will talk to Myra, even though I think you must have heard wrong. Fenric recovered from his speechlessness then and sauntered out of the room without a word, choosing to scrap the whole event under the rug, as his friend seemed to be doing. After all, there was nothing else to be done. Alara was already out of the towns. Nevertheless, immediately Fenric left the room and shut the door behind him. Corin spewed out curses and punched the wall closest to him with all his might and anger, causing his hands to bleed and blister. He didn't seem to be fazed, though, by the blood dripping and staining the German tiles, for he punched the wall again and again, seeking to abate the feeling of restlessness that had tripled by the reason of Fenric's reports. 6 years later, Alara Virely inhaled deeply, calming her fraying nerves whilst sitting in the limousine her friend had hired for her. In her hands was the ticket to the party, which he had pleaded with her for months to attend, the party that would herald her return to the world she had been exiled from. She had thought she was done with that part of the universe until she had met Jace Thorne. "Ma'am, we are here," her driver reminded her. It's been more than 5 minutes, she thought, looking at the slim watch on her slender wrist. More than 5 minutes since she arrived, resetting her mind and preparing it to take, in a cool stride, whatever she would see at this party. "I'm aware, sir. Just give me a few more, please." Her phone dinged right at that moment, preventing her from hearing the driver's dissatisfied grunt. Quickly she swiped it open, her breath held in suspension as she perused the content of the message. It was just payment from a client for a successful treatment. "Will." She exhaled harshly, splaying her right hand on her chest. She didn't want any interruption of any kind, not even from her favorite people, especially them. Her eyes, for the third time, found the hall, which had been picked for the event. It was huge and extraordinarily beautiful, big enough to contain a lot of people. She wondered if she would see familiar faces here, if they would even remember her. A lot had happened since her exile, and although she was tougher than she had been then, she would have appreciated a quiet evening with no familiar faces. But the celebrant was a popular one. Her wish would be nearly impossible to grant. The loud sighing of the driver again interrupted her reverie, reminding her of his impatience. And so, with a final inhalation of calmness, she thanked him for the ride and stepped out of the car. As she walked toward the hall's entrance, blinded by the lights of the paparazzi, she wondered if they knew who she was, if they knew what her role in tonight's party would be. She hoped not. Just then she noticed a handsome, suited male in his late 20s. She made the guess, approaching her. "Dr. Cadell, please this way." Alara sighed softly in relief, following the male immediately. Her friend had made arrangements for her. This new man took her past the standing queue of finely dressed men and women, who were waiting to be scanned by the hefty man in front, to the hefty man-scanner. The man-scanner, who could easily pass as a bouncer, exchanged glances with her escort, probably wondering why the latter was displaying such favoritism in the open. "It's Dr. Cadell." The only indication that the bouncer had heard the escort was a peak of his eyebrows before he turned to his iPad to search for her name. Alara tapped her feet on the ground, counting until the moment when the man would locate her name. She was already hearing murmurs from the people in the queue. They were wondering why she was taken past them. They were wondering if she was more important than the most elite of the states still in queue. They didn't know who she was. Alara relaxed, a relaxation that became short-lived when there was a tap on her arm. "Alara." It had been 6 years, but Alara would never forget the voice of the lady who had been the source of her misery for 3 solid years. Myra Solon. Alara quickly sported an aloof demeanor and swiveled gracefully. There wasn't an indication on her face that she remembered her old rival. "It is really you," Myra breathed in awe, not believing what her eyes were seeing, fanning the embers of Alara's aloofness. "Do I know you?" Alara asked, almost purring in excitement when she saw the swift change in Myra's countenance. The awe was displaced and replaced with sheer contempt. Alara watched, unmoved, as Myra cackled in derision, attracting the attention of the people in the queue. "What are you doing here, Alara? How are you here?" Yet Alara remained silent. And when she saw that Myra wasn't forthcoming with any more speeches, for the latter was unable to get rid of the shock of seeing a curvy Alara, she turned around and tapped her escort on the arm. "Can we leave?" This simple question, this snide dismissal, caused Myra to see red, to grit her teeth in anger. Without stopping to think, she dragged Alara by the arm, causing a tear to spot on the latter's dress. The escort tried to intervene then, seeing the harsh treatment meted out to the VIP his master had told him to take care of, but Alara stopped him with a wave of her hand. She could handle it. "I don't know who you are, but are you sure you can cover the expenses for this torn dress?" Myra seized that opportunity to look at the dress Alara was wearing very well. She bit her lips hard, angry, as she noticed how the dress fitted Alara perfectly, gliding over her curves with effortless elegance. "What do you think of the party, Alara? Does it meet your standards?" "Too small. It was the best we could gather on short notice. Perhaps if you had accepted my invitation earlier instead of giving a reply a day ago, I would have dug up something bigger." Alara virally held back a scoff, hearing her good friend Jace Thorne talk. She didn't even know if he was being sarcastic or actually being real. The party was too small. She shook her head. It was good that she had given him her response yesterday. If this crowd was what he had managed to scavenge in a day, then what would have happened if she had given him the response 2 months ago? She had thought it would be a small party where she wouldn't have to meet other people from surrounding cities and towns, where she wouldn't have to meet Corin Villaro, at least not yet. But it seemed that the fates had another thing in mind. "Well, as long as he doesn't cross me," she thought, letting out a breath when the moderator called her friend to the stage. She chuckled when he dropped a kiss on her cheek. "Wish luck." As if he needed it. She only hoped that he wouldn't be so elaborate with her return, that he would just confer on her the title and then declare the party over. "Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. As you all know, I am Jace, and I bid you welcome to this beautiful event." Alara tuned out then, not interested in hearing the boring talk on state politics. She allowed her eyes to roam around the room, from her apex position, occupying the only VIP seat with Jace. And from this position, she could see everyone in the large hall. They were over 200. And Jace had called them small. She scoffed softly, her eyes retaining their aloof quality when they collided with Myra Solon. Her old rival was scowling at her. Alara found it funny. Her eyes perched before she could stop them on the seat next to Myra. It was empty. Did Corin go somewhere? She shrugged her shoulders. Why should she care? His whereabouts weren't her business. He would never be her business again. Now, I would like to invite someone to the podium, someone of great importance. Jace's statement brought her to attention, causing her to look away from Myra and center her gaze on her good friend. Therefore, she didn't see when Corin stepped into the row and sat on the empty seat beside Myra. He sat and watched her, yet she didn't notice. She was too wrapped up in the emotions assailing her. All right, here it goes, she mused, clasping her hands on her thigh, taking deep breaths to placate her breathing that had gotten a bit erratic. She still hated public speaking or appearances. Someone that has a special place in my heart. We met at a medical institute. She was the doctor who healed my father of the strange illness. You all know about the deadly disease my old man battled with. Gasps erupted in the hall, gasps of surprise and approval. There were murmurs of happiness and relief. The people were also curious to see the miracle worker. Alara hated it. She wished Jace would be done with the epistle already so that she could leave. She had to be home by 9. She had to tuck her favorite people into bed. You know, I've been trying to poach her for a year plus since she cured my father. I had offered her all manner of contracts, even went as far as waiting under the rain while she got busy at the lab, ignoring me. Alara chuckled then with the crowd. A fact about Jace was that he exaggerated things, sometimes out of proportion. The incident he had talked about had just been a stroke of bad luck for her good friend. That fateful day he had come to see her, but due to the amount of patients visiting, he had to wait outside. Sadly, a heavy rain had started and met him, but only for 5 minutes. He had been ushered into his car by his bodyguard immediately. And here he was, talking like he had waited for hours. Alara chuckled again. However, her smile became tentative when she saw Corin staring at her, no, glaring at her. When had he joined Myra? She hoped they were married now, seeing as they couldn't get away from each other when she had been a stumbling block. She nonchalantly glanced away from him, like she hadn't seen him in the first place, and looked at her friend who was still talking grand things about her. Well, to cut the long story short, after a year of wooing her tenaciously, she is here with me, and would be resuming as not only chief director in the hospital's headquarters, but also as the managing director for all our hospitals in this state, more like the owner of our medical sector. I can't let any other company or government buy her attention. She is a national treasure. Alara furrowed her eyebrows, the noises of celebration drowning her zeal to call Jace to his exaggeration. That sly fox. He had told her she would perform medical duties in the headquarters, along with being director for all the Whitman hospitals. That was an issue, she couldn't. It meant that she would meet more people than expected. The Whitman hospitals were present in every town and city. Would she even have the time to rest? Her hand flew to rest on her forehead, in frustration when she heard Jace calling her to join him on the podium. She would kill him, she surmised, wearing a thin smile as she stood up from the seat and sauntered to the podium. Alara Virely kept a perfunctory smile on her lips as Jace Thorne led her to greet many people. Her arm enclosed in his, she was aware they were passing an image that they were together. At first, she had wanted to create a chasm, an awareness that it wasn't so, but now she decided to let the impression continue, not in the least ready to make an explanation to her father, Jerk Voss, who was approaching her now. Walking arm in arm with him was a middle-aged lady she hadn't seen in her entire life. Did the old man get married again? Nevertheless, she maintained an aloof countenance when Jace did an introduction, an aloofness which didn't disappear when her father chuckled drily before speaking. "There is no need for an introduction, Mr. Jace. Dr. Alara is my daughter." It was Jace's turn to chuckle. "Mr. Jerk, your last name is Voss. I may not be good with remembering names, but I remember yours." Jerk blushed in happiness, pleased that the almighty Jace remembered his name. This caused him to raise his shoulders in pride, an act which caused Alara to peak an eyebrow. Her father was still the same after 6 years. "You are right, Mr. Jace. Voss is my last name, but Cadell is my late wife's last name. There had been a slight altercation in the family a few years ago after my wife's death, and my daughter had left. It's no surprise that she had changed her name. However, it would explain why I had been unable to find her." Unable to find her. Alara held back a bitter chuckle. She hadn't changed her name for the longest time after her exile from the city. She found the lie amusing, but she said nothing. There was no need for that. She wasn't planning to accept the man back as her father. He wasn't even that in the truest sense. So she stayed quiet, waiting for the lifting of the stillness, which transcended past their orbit and infiltrated the spheres of the other party attendees. "Is this true, Alara?" Jace broke the ice finally, his voice a template for coldness. Alara had told him that her parents were dead. Had she lied to him? "Not at all, Jace. I don't know the old geezer. I'm flattered, however, that he thought me beautiful and valuable enough to claim as his daughter." A snide chuckle followed Alara's answer, unsettling Jerk. He didn't like the cold aura she was emitting, a material that only got worse when she shifted her attention from Jace to him and spoke. "But it's too bad, Mr. Jerk. I'm not looking for a father." Jerk furrowed his eyebrows, hearing Alara's rejection. But he refused to give up on his quest for her association, and the profit he would garner if she married the trillionaire Jace. "Alara, my dear, I know you are still upset about the little problem that happened 6 years ago, but let bygones be bygones. Forget the past. Don't you miss your home?" When Alara's face remained apathetic to his words, Jerk panicked and decided to toe the rare route. "I am sorry for my anger, Alara. I'm really sorry, my beloved. You know how it always is, but—" He stopped short when Alara raised her hand casually, as if tired of hearing a belligerent child speak. "I'm flattered by your attention, old man, but I don't desire it. I am not your daughter." Alara ignored her father's sudden white face, a sheet of anger and frustration, and turned to Jace, sporting an icy smile on her lips. "Can we get out of this space? The man is beginning to suffocate me." Jace nodded and glared at Jerk, who stepped back in fear, especially as 2 guards materialized out of nowhere to escort him out of the venue. "Mr. Jerk, your time here is up. Leave now. I won't tolerate anyone disturbing my esteemed guest." There was a bristling quality in Jace's voice, one that Alara had heard a few times, dangerous and terrible. Despite his jolly nature, this bristle voice quality, which cropped up once in a while, was why she thought him a predator. And from her father's reaction of terror, it seemed she was right. Alara watched, satisfied, as her father was escorted out of the hall with his date. Before he left from the first exit, however, he turned and glared at her. When Jace breathed deeply beside her, she knew he had seen it. She knew her father would pay for that particular glare. Jace was quite possessive of her, and although it scared her sometimes, moments like this made it all right. Yet she wondered about how he would make her father pay. 2 seconds later, she shrugged her shoulders. She didn't care. She didn't care or shiver either when her eyes met Corin Valero at the far end of the hall, not even when he started walking toward her with Myra Solon. "Tell the truth, Alara." Alara shifted her focus to Jace, who was looking down at her with intense concentration. Is he your father? Do you both have a history? Alara sighed. There was no way she was escaping this. Lying would only cause more harm than good, and Jace was a good friend. He was my father, until he disowned me 6 years ago, until he revealed I was dropped at his barn by someone, a someone he cursed repeatedly before throwing me out of his town. There was silence while Jace ruminated on this. Why would he do that? Because I was no longer profitable to him. Alara stated casually when Corin came to stand before them with Myra. Corin, how have you been, old cow? Alara furrowed her eyebrows when she heard Jace's mode of greeting her ex-husband, when he stepped forward and engulfed Corin in a hug, which the latter returned enthusiastically, although his eyes never left her. They were friends. Wow, what a small world. When they disengaged, Jace took up the reins of conversation. But Alara wasn't fooled. She knew he would continue his drilling about her history when the party was over. Who is the beauty beside you, Corin? Your wife. You didn't invite me to your wedding ceremony, friend. That should be a new low for you. Corin chuckled, and Alara held her breath in mild shock, not believing her heart. She secretly pinched herself after the hearty chuckle sent tendrils of sexual excitement around her body. She blamed this reaction on the fact that she rarely saw Corin smile, but she would rather be dead than pine for Corin, than make this discovery obvious. No, we are not married, we are just. Alara literally had to clamp her teeth at this point to stop her tongue from spouting best friends. She couldn't believe they were still keeping up the ruse. Engaged for now, Corin finished, without even glancing at Myra, as loving couples usually did. Myra, whose entire focus was on Alara and her possible relationship with Jace, wasn't interested in deterring herself. She was too distracted by her evil thoughts to notice that Corin had been glancing at Alara since they arrived before Jace. But Jace noticed. He also noticed the unusual coldness in Alara as she looked at Corin and his fiancée, but he said nothing. There would be ample time for investigations later. I see congratulations are in order then, Jace finally said, his smile not as vibrant as before. However, he still shook Corin's hand. Corin, who nodded robotically to his friend's pleasantries, when all he wanted was to grab Alara and ask her what she was doing here, what she was doing with his old friend. Was she with him for the money? How was she even a famous doctor? When had she gotten educated? Thank you, Mr. Jace. What about you and your lady? Is she your fiancée? Alara held back a scoff, so like Myra to ask stupid questions just to compare ranks. And how would that be your business, young lady? Jace inquired, causing Myra to blush in embarrassment and Alara to chuckle heartily, a chuckle that only served to taint her graces in Corin's eyes. Had he been a fool to believe Fenric Lorne 6 years ago? His ex-wife no longer looked innocent or docile. Corin watched as Alara excused herself by tapping Jace's arm, her eyes communicating her reason to his friend. He watched as Jace released her arm. He watched as his friend watched Alara go to the restroom. Corin was so angry and started regretting how he had treated Alara. He was now seeing her with another man who happened to be his friend. Also, she was not like the way she was before, and now she really needed him. The regret was looming in his face.